Hey heroes, Jonathan here at Night Knowledge. With the Giant Kings DLC set to come out for Age of Wonders 4, it got me back into the game, but I came back to a vastly updated landscape, and as usual, I've spent more time refining and designing new faction builds than I have been playing. So in today's video, I'm going to show you one of my favorite builds, the critting Barbarians. Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe and to check out my Age of Wonders 4 playlist that has additional guides, gameplay, and other faction builds that can give you some ideas on your next playthrough. The critting Barbarians is a very straightforward design that is great for both early and mid-game. The strengths of this build involve having both your ruler, heroes, and units constantly critting, resulting in extremely high damage. Every unit on the battlefield will be a threat, especially if they're adjacent to your heroes. The only weaknesses I've encountered was that on smaller maps or in the early game that you're lacking mana, using it sparingly in combat, preventing you from fielding magic origin units, and instead reserving it for your enchantments. The build also focuses more on melee units rather than casters. So let's look at the design, starting with the physical form traits, which has one of the corner pieces, Overwhelm Tactics, that gives units a non-stacking bonus to crit chance by 20% when standing next to an adjacent ally. I actually found that you're flanking often, so I took Sneaky, which increases flank damage by 25%. And the last trait I took was Cheerful, increasing morale gain by 50%, which affects your crit chance. Next, onto the origin culture, which is Barbarian, providing one affinity to chaos and nature. When Age of Wonders first launched, the Barbarian culture ability Savage Strikes would give you a first hit bonus of blight damage, which was good for short engagements, but horrible for larger battles. Savage Strikes now triggers whenever your unit crits, which could mean nearly every hit now. Onto the society traits, we've selected Runesmiths and Silver-Tongued, with Runesmiths being the critical trait because we'll be applying tons of enchantments and need every edge to save mana. I personally enjoy Silver-Tongued because it gives you an additional Whispering Stone and then makes any trades free with free cities. We choose the Materium and Order Tome of Discipline as our starting tome for the Inner Mastery, Minor Race Transformation that gives status resistance and the more important 20% increased healing received. Empowered Strikes that encourages multi-hit units rather than shock unit attacks, as the third attack will give a 60% chance to stun, preventing movement and action. Note that these unit enchantments no longer affect your heroes. The Monk unit is pretty good, as is the Mantra of Purification, which is a nifty spell that both heals and removes 2 negative statuses. We'll talk about the future tomes in a moment. Let's finish off by selecting our ruler, which for the Barbarian culture can only be a champion, which works well because mortal champions provide a skill, Champion of War, that further increases adjacent units' crit chances. When it comes to your ruler's class, I'd recommend one of the melee-centric ones. I've selected the Spellblade using the Cestus, which is unlocked through the Pantheon rewards. The Spellblade has skills for both melee and casting spells, allowing you to be flexible in your attack approach. The Cestus is a fun weapon that deals extra damage on the third attack and hurts adjacent enemies to your target. It gives you a free jump skill as well that can bridge the gap between you and your target, possibly saving you an action point for an additional attack or to flank them. Now let's talk about all the important future tomes recommended for this build, starting with the other Tier 1 tome of Pyromancy, which provides Searing Blades and Fiery Arrow unit enchantments for both your melee and ranged units. It has 2 direct damage spells of Ignite and Immolate, and if you have to, you can prioritize the Pyromancer unit over the lesser magma spirit because, as discussed, our mana income will be low and you won't be able to afford to field too many. In tier 2, the tomes I'd select are Artificing and Revelry in that order. The most important item to select in the Materium Artificing tome is Artisan Armaments, which gives a 20% crit chance buff to your melee units. I'd also select Siege Magic, which gives a buff to your magic casters, and for longer, higher difficulty sessions to select Artisan Fortifications. In the Double Chaos Affinity Tome of Revelry, the spells you're looking for include Blood Fury Weapons, a melee unit enchantment that increases damage and gives 5 morale when they score a kill in combat. Reveler's Heart is another minor transformation that, like the physical form trait Cheery, increases morale gain by 50% from all sources. The third choice would be the Scald unit that has a basic fire attack that can cause insanity on targets, causing them to attack their allies. Remember, when unlocking tier 3 tomes, you'll need 3 affinity of the specific tome. The tier 3 tome you'll select are Devastation and Cleansing Flame, once again in that order. Devastation, like Artificing, is critical because it provides Flame Burst weapons, another melee unit enchantment that increases crit but also causes a fire damage AoE to adjacent enemies on kill. So now your melee units causes extra damage from kills and gains extra morale. I like Focus Devastation, a magic unit enchantment for the secondary ability to cancel defense mode. And finally, the Warbreed is a strong tier 4 shock unit, and the Monstrous Rebirth spell is pretty cool, possibly turning the tide of battle against your opponents, turning a tier 1 to 3 unit into a Warbreed that dies at the end of combat. The Order Chaos Tome of Cleansing Flame has yet another melee unit enchantment, Flame Blessed Champions, that gives a chance to stack burning on targets. It synergizes well with the Pure Flame Staves, which applies to your casters that can now apply Condemned. At this point, you can use the Zealous Ignition buff debuff spell or the tier 4 Pyre Templar Polearm unit. Tier 4 tomes will require 5 affinity, and we should have more than enough, and the main tome I'd recommend at this point is the Tome of Demon Gate for one of the last sources of crit, through the major race transformation of Demonkin, which as an Infernal Fiend type gives 15% additional crit chance. With this build in place, when it comes to combat, basically have your units get adjacent to your ruler or at the very least to each other before attacking to get the crit bonus. Try to get units that can hit 3 times rather than a shock unit's singular attack. And finally, when your heroes hit the appropriate levels, make sure you select the Chaos Signature skills that is a stacking 10% crit chance to all non-hero units. And I know I'm showing you a warrior class, but a Spellblade will have the Keen Edge skill as well. That will increase the hero's crit chance by 20%. I hope this gives you a good idea of a possible crit build for the Barbarian culture in Age of Wonders 4. Let me know in the comments below if you try it out and what you do to optimize this build further. Check out my Age of Wonders 4 playlist, which has a ton of older builds that, while a little outdated, can give you a good idea of strong or at least flavorful builds. Check out the rest of my channel for other videos on Age of Wonders 4, video games, board games, and other fun things. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.